Chapter 17. Haddad woke at sea, his lungs burning as he breathed smoke from the censer swinging above his head. He thrashed and threw his hands over the sides of the stasis box. Haddad moaned in pain as his muscles shook with tremors and cramps. The crash of waves could be clearly heard in the hold as the former League officer gripped his head and coughed up the dust from his lungs. Lanterns swung from beams, and he tried to orient himself by their light. Latilla and her entire party had been interred in stasis boxes within minutes of the Artificer's defeat. Slowly, the party was being revived. They must be at or near Jamuraa. Iola knelt beside a stasis box, and Haddad could see Latilla's features in the changing light. She awoke almost gently, her eyes opening and the look of confusion fading in seconds. Haddad felt a surge of envy as he wondered how Iola had spared Latilla pain. "We are just outside the colony, mistress," Iola said. "The council has exiled you here for life." She paused, and Haddad could hear the despair in her voice as she continued. "All your holdings are forfeit, and your retainers were expelled with you." Haddad remembered Iola's pride in managing Latilla's house and felt a little pity. "Why were we awakened at sea?" Latilla demanded as she levered up herself from the erstwhile coffin. No word or expression showed awareness of her servant's loss. "We should have been awakened after we safely docked." Latilla was in full regalia, and she tested the strength of her cane with a few sharp blows against the stasis boxes of her servants. She ignored the groans that issued as the human slaves clawed their way to consciousness. One slave uttered a curse, and Latilla tested her cane on flesh. "The League has attacked ships near the port," Iola answered, wringing her hands in worry. "The captain thought all passengers should be awake in case the ship was hit." Even though Haddad was in immediate danger, he felt a tremendous surge of hope at the news. The League was finally operating around the colony. Not only was his nation fighting back, but also escape might be easier with local forces in the area. "Everyone up on deck!" Latilla ordered as she strode to the stair and forced her way up in the wind. The others followed her, still staggering as they recovered from stasis, but weakness was no excuse in Latilla's service. It was midday, and the sun sent down rays through the clouds. Haddad wondered why the sea was so rough. Then he turned from viewing the coast and looked seaward. The clouds of a storm were piled high and dark. The captain nervously considered the storm as the ship sailed closer to the protected bay. "Captain, what's the problem?" Latilla demanded. The captain was a massive Keldon with a peg leg, which he pivoted on when Latilla spoke.
"We had word from a warship that the League is trying to sink ships in port and block access to the piers," he explained. "I am waiting for an armed escort vessel to follow us in."
"I will provide all the cover you need," Latilla said. She rapped the captain smartly on his wooden leg. "Take the ship in, and I will watch for League patrols." The captain opened his mouth to argue, but decided to keep silent at Latilla's angry look. Haddad saw that the Artificer wanted to show her strength after her defeat at Gorsha's hands.
"Take her in,"
the captain ordered the helmsman. The sailors swallowed nervously and turned the ship's wheel to take them into the channel. Latilla sent Iola down into the hold to inventory what the council had allowed the Artificer to bring with her. Haddad looked at the approaching coastline. How long had it been since he saw Jamuraa? He couldn't know. He didn't even know if this was the first time he was awake. Keld had made him doubt himself on many levels. He looked at the shore and wondered if he could ever go home again. The ship was inside the channel and moving into protected waters. The storm that loomed behind began to break up as the ship pulled closer to the dock. Latilla and all her supporters were back on deck, arranging themselves in lines and trying to appear impressive. Latilla sent crewmen and slaves from their regular duty stations into the ship's cargo areas to find additional clothes and weapons. The ship was docking, and Haddad could feel the tone of the propulsion spells changing as they moved the ship closer to the pier. A crowd was gathered, and freight handlers stood ready to empty the ship at a moment's notice. As the ship was tied off, Latilla walked to the gangplank. "I have returned to you with news that Keld is no more," she shouted. There was a general air of confusion among the crowd and the ship's complement. "Keld has given up. and rejected the prophecy that you have all accepted, that this land is the home of heroes and must be reclaimed from the weak and corrupt league to the west. A few Keldons began cheering because they did believe that their birthright was being stolen. Other warriors and some slaves cheered because glory required a great cause. The rest cheered as Hadad cheered because it was expected of them. Hadad considered the Keldons exiles as Latilla continued her exhortations. You are Keld, all that Keld has been, the defeat of our enemies, the conquest of new lands, the construction of the future. You are the children of all who have gone before. It's time to pick up the prize left by the heroes from whom we sprang. Hadad's eyes locked on a familiar figure. It was Greel, Orissa's demonic assistant. Latilla had brought more than rhetoric from the land of her ancestors. How long would it take this cancer to grow in a new land? Hadad promised himself his first act upon escaping would be to reveal Greel's nature. The children of Jamuraa would not lie in graves to feed the monster's appetite. I bring you the future, Latilla said, spreading her arms wide. Hadad turned from the scene and considered the sea. Then he saw the nose of a blimp poke itself out from stormy clouds that hung offshore. For a few seconds he was alone as the others concentrated on Latilla and her speech. It was not until the bombs fell that shouts drowned out Latilla's voice. The blimp was huge, and it withdrew back into the clouds as each bomb sprouted wings. The weapon's trajectories flattened and their velocity increased. Shouts sounded as almost every slave ran for cover, with a few curling up on the ground and trying to shut out the world. Hadad saw them trampled by the running crowd, their flesh torn by shoes and boots. Warriors drew weapons and shouted challenges, but the airship was gone, and only the bombs remained to hear the futile cries. The weapons neared the water and came straight at the ship.
Why aren't the fire barges shooting?
Shouted a warrior who had accompanied Latilla into exile. The bombs skimmed over the ships and detonated among the dockside warehouses. Splinters and fiery debris rained down everywhere. Chunks of wreckage draped across the rigging over Hadad's head, and he joined a rush to clear the ship. Latilla was almost trampled in the stampede, and Hadad hid a smile as he swirled past her livid face. The ropes began to burn, and sections of the dock were covered in flame. Weapons stored in the warehouses shattered and released waves of flammable liquid. Hadad could hear the collapse of burning floors and the hiss as timbers dropped among the dock pilings and extinguished in the sea. The captured League soldier flattened against the side of a building as more people rushed past him. He could see Latilla running up the gangplank to fight the fire on the ship. Her hands moved, and the flames shrank back like a frightened pet. She waved for the crowds to return, even as she calmed the fire. Now magic users from the colony were running up to the docks, and the destruction Hadad had cheered began to be controlled. Slowly, the fires flickered out. The warriors began to chant Latilla's name, and she directed the final efforts of the impromptu fire brigades. The League had interrupted Latilla's speech, but she rallied the colony to her cause because of it. It was nearing dark when Latilla and the rest of the household straggled into their quarters. The fires destroyed one warehouse completely, though all ships were saved. Lord Urret sat within the house, and Latilla moved to confront him. Hadad stayed in the outer room and looked through the door. The curtains were drawn and the lights low as defensive measures against air attacks. Latilla appeared incensed that the League would dare attack the colony. Where were the firecasters and magic users? Why were we left so exposed? She demanded. Lord Urret answered her. The former swamp overseer was in charge of the colony slaves and had become an important figure. The western expedition did not go as planned. We had to retreat, Urret confessed shamefacedly. Latilla reined in her temper with visible difficulty. A temporary state of affairs. We will rebuild and crush them like we have always done. She spoke confidently. Urret shook his head. Their armies do not wait for the blow. Now they seek to fight. He looked up and seemed to stare through the roof. Their airships range over the west looking for detachments to kill. Almost all fire barges are protecting the armies in our new holdings. In fact, their airships seek battle relentlessly with any barge they can find. They must be using their blimps, but we can destroy their bases as we did before, Latilla said. There'll be more forces arriving from Keld, regardless of what the fools in the council believe. We can barely keep our forward bases intact while new classes of airships drop bombs on our home ground. We will have to recall forces and concentrate our warriors, Urret insisted. I will hear from you later, Urret, Latilla commanded. Leave me now, so I might rest. Urret said nothing, but bowed and withdrew, his face stony at his dismissal. Hadad kept still as the major domo, Bryak, bowed and entered. The chief slave appeared calm and content as he waited to hear Latilla.
"What has happened here, Bryak?" Latilla asked.
The first expeditions went well, and many slaves were taken for the glory of Keld. There are shiploads winding their way to cradle houses in the north. Cities fell, and the artificers control mines and refineries for the hero's blood. Huge stores await only shipment back home to build you an army,"
Bryak explained. Latilla smashed his hand with her cane.
"This is home now. Keld would not have me, and now they will live with their decision. Suspend all shipments north until further notice. Start construction of factories and a cradle house. The midwives and female slaves are to report to me from now on."
Bryak whitened at the blow, but remained still as Latilla stood and began to pace.
"What happened to the second expedition?"
Latilla questioned. Hadad saw Bryak consider his words carefully. Latilla collaborated with the military commanders before leaving and would not brook even implied criticism from a slave, however favored he might be.
"The attack, from all reports, went well, but the League machines proved more lethal than previously believed. Their weapons were heavier, and our war mannequins could not overwhelm them. But the battle was still in our favor until the planeswalker appeared on the field and unleashed a great spell. He turned the ground of the ancestors against their descendants."
"How many died under Teferi's hand?" demanded Latilla.
"Almost none, but the warriors had powered the hollow warriors a long time, and many fell from exhaustion," Bryak answered. "The leaders called for retreat."
"So they were not defeated? They gave up?"
Latilla said angrily.
"At the heart of an enemy war production they retired because they couldn't beat the League with the first blows?"
Latilla threw herself back into her chair and drummed her fingers on the side table.
"How do the warriors feel about their loss?"
Latilla spoke slowly as she considered her plans.
"Many of them cannot accept that they did lose," Bryak said. "The sailors have lost to the League before, but the army has not suffered a serious setback since it landed. Many of the warriors are angry, striking out at slaves and each other. The number of fights between warriors has soared, despite the best efforts of the ward leaders to curb dominance battles."
Latilla nodded to herself in satisfaction.
"Of course they're angry. They should be enraged. The leaders betrayed them by withdrawing from the field too soon. Had the army stayed, they would have conquered the enemy," she said intently. "We must act quickly to isolate those who would lead us to defeat."
Bryak nodded, but with some confusion.
"Mistress, I'm sure you know best, but I don't know how you can displace the war leaders,"
Bryak stated. Latilla only threw her cane at his head for daring to question her decisions.
"Of course I can't take direct control of the army, but there are always subordinates whose ambitions can be fired and directed to my benefit. Other voices will say the commands in battle, but the orders will be mine. Call my supporters to me when dawn comes."
Latilla went to her bed, and Hadad crept away as well. The artificer had been expelled from Keld in disgrace. Awake for one day, she was already setting up a personal empire. Hadad shook his head in reluctant admiration and went to his room. There, he dreamed of a kingdom of puppets with Latilla pulling the strings. He sank into a deeper sleep as he appeared in the dream, a marionette, dancing to Latilla's commands. Hadad carried another set of invitations to captains of barge crews and commanders of small companies. Latilla had thrown parties and private dinners all week. She was still imperious and cold, but many of the lesser war leaders received assurances of support for their ambitions. Latilla cast her net wide, and Hadad hit every section of the camp. But he was not the only emissary, and he shuddered as Greel stepped from a tent ahead of him. The monster was smiling and laughing as he left a group of drunken comrades.
Hadad!
He called and walked over. The League technician wanted to run, but could not. Hadad felt a cold sweat as he realized that Greel called him by name.
"What are you holding, slave?"
Greel asked. He smiled broadly at Hadad, and that alone signaled he was not a Keldon.
"Invitations to another of Latilla's dinners, master."
Perhaps, if he was obsequious enough, Greel would be bored and go away.
"Let me see those."
Greel reached and took the envelopes from Hadad's fingers. He flipped through them quickly. Many of the passerbys looked at Greel. A Keldon male appearing to read was unusual. Hadad usually read the messages aloud or handed it to a literate slave when he found the addressee.
"Many of these are my friends,"
Greel slurred.
I will deliver them if I see them. Greel appeared drunk, but Hadad knew it was an act. Failure to deliver the invitations would mean a severe beating for Hadad. I would not have expected you to find friends so soon, Hadad said as he reached for the invitations. It was broad daylight, and Hadad was growing tired of fear. Greel gave back the invitations, but still smiled. I have many friends, old and new in this land. He tapped the bronze armband concealed under Hadad's clothes. You could be my friend since you bear this. Hadad could not stop from shying away. Greel's face lost its pleasant expression, twisting into a snarl. It almost seemed to glow, and for a moment Hadad thought Greel's true form would burst forth. The fiery light sprang not from inside the monster, but from the steams of fireballs rising into the sky. Hadad and Greel looked toward the heavens and saw the Keldon weapons converging on an apparently empty space. Then sheets of flame outlined a camouflaged blimp and its defensive fields. Hadad wondered if more than color hid it as his eyes refused to lock on. Suddenly a rack of bombs rained down, and the blimp disappeared. The launchers shot at the falling weapons, and one exploded in a green disk of fire that enveloped the other bombs. The weapons did not fratricide, but instead diverged wildly, corkscrewing through the air. Hadad was rooted to the spot as Greel gripped his arm tightly. The familiar's hand did not even tremor as Hadad tried to pull free. Explosions sounded throughout the camp, but Hadad saw only one. The flash was brilliant white, and the League technician was hurled to the ground as Greel keened in pain. Hadad's eyes cleared, and he saw that the bomb had hurled ropes of fire. The material clung to everything as it burned. Slaves near one building dumped water on a strand stuck to an exterior wall. The water just drained away, and the slaves tried desperately to scrape the fire off as the wood burned fiercely. Greel crouched in gasping agony. Hadad could see channels of burnt flesh across his chest and neck. The skin bubbled as Greel knelt, oblivious to the world. Hadad ran as magic users closed to extinguish the fires in the sky. The blimp had vanished, though fire streamers still shot into the air, searching for the craft. After a few more seconds, the fire barges stopped, the fires extinguished as the might of the Keldon mages turned to ending the fires. Greel rose to his feet as a group of slaves came to help him. His features were burned away, and bone shone through the charred meat. One of the slaves vomited at the sight. The monster's fists crushed skulls and caved in chests as he tore through the crowd around him. He ran toward the edge of the colony, pulling a screaming slave behind him like a child's rag doll. Hadad hoped that a mage would burn Greel down before he could feed, but he doubted the monster would be caught. Hadad hurried to deliver the last of the letters, hoping that he could escape soon. Hadad shifted at the back of the crowd. Litulla had been closeted with her circle all night, and Hadad was dismissed before he could learn much of their plans. He did know that Greel was an instrumental part of those plans, and that was the reason enough for worry. A platform had been raised in the field with a stock of pens in the background. Litulla chose the spot because it was the largest open space, but Hadad smiled slightly as the morning breeze wafted over the crowd. Litulla's words would smell like manure to the listening masses. There was a stir as the artificer came into view. The stage was low, and there was no bunting or color. Litulla did not warm up the crowd as Hadad half expected. Instead, she launched directly into the heart of her speech. "You have lost everything!" she screamed to the crowd. Mutters rose as they absorbed her words. "You left Keld and the battles of the north. Many of you were shipped in stasis, powerless to affect your destiny. There are no cradle houses in this land. The slaves are arrogant, and there is the tedium and trouble of working without female partners. Why would anyone come here?" Litulla paused and looked at the crowd. "Because there is land to conquer," she shouted, and her supporters cheered her, with a few of the crowd joining in. "These lands were the home of your forebears. Heroes and gods roamed these hills and contested with each other, but an evil force swept over the land, killing and slaying in the dark of night. The widows and babes of your ancestors fled north to escape destruction." Litulla lifted her hands as if in benediction over the crowd. "But you have grown strong and have come to take your birthright back. You have arrived in the land from which Keld sprang, and found what? You have found a race of weaklings who hold what is yours." She whipped to cover off something on the stage. A steel ant lay revealed. "A race so cowardly that it constructs a machine to fight while its soldiers stay behind." She pointed up to the sky. a race that attacks your camps from the air for fear of your strength."
Finally, she whipped the last tarp off stage. 5 dead Keldons lay revealed, none with an obvious wound.
"An enemy who, when he failed to kill you, has resorted to the spread of corruption and disease."
Hadad had heard of some dying from illness, but found it unsurprising in a camp this size.
"The League has shown by its every action that it is the successor of evil that battled our forebears. Will you let them win again, or will you break the world and remake it in your image?"
Cheers erupted again, and Latilla seemed to swell as they rolled over her.
"The final days are upon us, and the final battle awaits in the west. Who will follow me into glory and victory?"
Even Hadad cheered and chanted her name, not because he wanted the Keldons to win, but because this expedition west might constitute his last chance to escape. He cheered the fulfillment of his own plans, and cursed the Keldons silently. "Pig slop!" Alexei exclaimed as the deck surged up, a gust of wind grappling with the blimp. "Keep it steady!" she yelled at the cabin to the pilot. A muttered obscenity wafted back, but she ignored it as she tried to keep her stomach under control. When would this ride be over? She wondered silently. The Hunter and the Eagle were hovering beside a storm. The 2 Mushan blimps had spent 3 days tossed by the winds as Teferi worked the storm. Jumping from ship to ship, he herded it toward the coast even as he wove his spells into the structure. The planeswalker was ready to expunge the Keldon colony from Jamuraa, and now his moment neared. Far out to sea, a fleet of surface warships waited to land marines and supplies, but Teferi had put the attack on hold. Through magic, he observed a huge exodus of the colony's warriors and fire barges the day before. The surge of power as Teferi appeared in the cabin surprised Alexei. The planeswalker dripped water from his sodden clothes onto the deck, and a puff of ozone and magic assaulted Alexei's nose. Teferi worked inside the storm now. "Signal the fleet to start coming in," he ordered in a tired voice. "I'm going to force the storm on shore. The Marines should be able to make an unopposed landing. You'll report any problems to the fleet." He looked exhausted. Alexei spoke quietly. "Can't you stay aboard and rest just a little?" she asked. "At least direct the storm from here instead of jumping into its winds?" Teferi shook his head. "It's already starting to tear apart," he explained. "We need to act now. Call the fleet in and be prepared for communications interference from now on. In a few minutes, I'm going to start a series of spells on the other blimp to smother Keldon calls for help. The enemy reinforcements marching west can't be allowed to know what happened. I must go." Teferi closed his eyes and jumped. Alexei spun and stared angrily at the communications mage. "You heard him," she said. "Call in the fleet now while we still have the opportunity." The man dropped into a trance as Alexei moved forward toward the pilot. "We'll be moving inland with the storm." The pilot looked at the edge of the turbulent clouds, then his hands flashed to his throttles and rammed them forward. Teferi had begun. The air seemed rough for Alexei, but seeing the torn mists and rain swirling inside Teferi's attack, she knew that the Hunter flew in relative calm. The clouds seemed to draw away. "Faster!" she ordered. "We're the same distance away," the pilot said irritably. "The storm's getting smaller." Alexei could see it now. The clouds were drawing nearer to the coast, and they grew even blacker. Like a hunkered giant, the storm crept into the bay. The clouds dropped lower and lower, touching the water. The high winds tore into the violent seas, and water began to pile up. The waves mounted higher and higher. Huge black-green hills of water raced from the storm to the docks. The bay narrowed, concentrating the attack. The first wave hit. All small boats turned to kindling, the planks and oars flung up onto the docks as the larger ships surged up against the pier. The second set of waves arrived. The large ships listed heavily, and the sea gripped and turned them. Masts hammered down on warehouses as ships rolled nearly 90 degrees. Most ships capsized. Looking through the set of magical lenses, Alexei saw a few sailors flung from the wreckage to break against the pier pilings. The storm seemed to submerge as another giant wave raced forth. Fire rose over the bay as Keldon mages realized it was a magical attack, but their spells were matches flung into a stream as water raced towards docks. In the colony, Alexei could see figures boiling out of houses and tents. Some went for higher ground as a wave over 30 feet tall hit the piers. Warehouses were shoved off their foundations,
struck houses and workshops like battering rams. More and more people ran inland as Teferi began to push the storm toward the colony once more. It crept up the bay, sending a constant stream of 15-foot waves forward. Each wall of water picked up debris and threw it further from the sea. Houses were bludgeoned by water and fragments of wood as the water level rose higher and higher. Like a cupped hand, Teferi's spell tried to empty the bay onto the town. Destruction mounted with every passing moment. The waves crashed far from the bay as the stables and corrals were destroyed. Here and there, barges raced for cover. Now water surrounded one and rose a few inches per second. The barge began to lose traction as it floated. Men swarmed over it. More and more crowded aboard, and Alexei could see swords hewing into slaves and warriors as the crew tried to preserve their craft. It was a hopeless battle, and under the mass of screaming humanity, the barge capsized as it lost all traction. No structures still stood in the town, and Teferi's spell dissipated as the last of it submerged in the muddy water. Deprived of the storm surge, water cascaded back toward the bay. Like a draining bathtub, the water left a thick coating of mud as it withdrew. Corpses and debris mixed with mud appeared as the land drained. A few living men struggled to stand, the water abandoning them in its race back to sea. Lexi could see hundreds of corpses and wondered if anyone could know how many had died in the previous minutes. Teferi appeared in the cabin. His eyes looked tired.
Tell the fleet to land outside of the bay,
He croaked.
they'll never be able to get through the mess down there. Warn them that there are still warriors inland who may attack as messengers. Reach them with news of this disaster.
Surely you can relay that information faster than we can, Alexei said.
No!
Teferi exclaimed and shook his head.
I must remain here. I destroyed the warriors and barges stationed here, but I killed the slaves as well.
Deep tremors began to shake his frame.
I have to stay here and begin rescue operations. I'll scout for survivors and work with the Marines when they land.
He sounded lost and despairing.
We'll stay and help you, Teferi,
Alexei offered.
I've killed thousands today,
Teferi whispered.
If it's to mean anything, this war must end soon. You'll fly west and tell Baron what has happened here. I'll maintain the communications interference so the Keldon armies in the west know nothing of this. Destroy them, Alexei. Kill them and end this war.
Teferi jumped without warning, leaving Alexei to carry word of the massacre to the League.